Alone. They use the word like an insult, like a punishment, like proof that you've lost. They whisper it behind your back, spit it out with a smile, convinced it's the sharpest blade they can throw. But solitude is not a wound, it's a mirror, and when you stand alone, you see the truth they spend their lives running from. Their value was never yours to need. The crowd thrives on numbers. They count their worth by how many voices echo theirs, how many footsteps follow the same path. To them, togetherness is safety. To you, it became a leash. Every laugh you forced, every nod you gave, every step you took beside those who didn't value you was just another chain dragging you further from yourself. They called it belonging. You knew it was suffocation. And when you stopped moving with them, the silence arrived. Not weakness, not defeat. Silence like a shadow, silence like a wall, silence like a crown. They expected you to crawl back, to beg for their approval, to prove you still needed what they withheld. But you didn't beg, you didn't return. You stood still, and in that stillness they saw something terrifying. A presence that no longer required their validation. They tried to mock it, tried to twist it into pity. Look at them, alone. But pity is hollow when spoken from fear, and fear is exactly what their voices carried. Because deep down they understood, walking with them meant walking in circles, chasing recognition that was never meant for you. Standing alone meant stepping outside their script entirely, and once you step out, you stop being a character in their story. You become the author of your own. So let them count their numbers, let them lean on each other, let them believe their value multiplies in a crowd. You know better now. Alone isn't the end. Alone is the beginning. Alone isn't weakness. Alone is the only place where silence sharpens into strength, where scars harden into armor, where the Joker smiles, not because he needs company, but because solitude was always the stage he owned. They don't understand why you choose solitude. To them, being alone is failure, a mark of weakness, proof that you've been rejected. So they circle you with their glances, sharp and cutting, like vultures waiting for movement. Every laugh in the distance, every whisper behind your back carries the same message. You're alone, so you must be broken. They mistake numbers for value, noise for strength, and attention for truth. And in their blindness, they reveal the smallness of their own world. They try to dress it up as advice. It's better to walk with someone than stand alone. But advice from the crowd is just fear with a smile. They fear what it means to face themselves without distraction, so they project that fear onto you. They want you to believe solitude is a curse, because if it isn't, then everything they built, their cliques, their noise, their constant search for validation, collapses into dust. Their lives depend on the illusion that being surrounded means being strong, so they push harder, they mock louder, they exaggerate the weight of your silence, hoping it will crush you back into their orbit. But pressure doesn't break the ones who've already walked through fire. Pressure only proves the difference. They lean on each other because they can't stand alone, and you stand alone because you no longer need to lean. What they call loneliness is the very thing they run from, the mirror of their own weakness. And the longer you remain untouched by their voices, the more their certainty fractures. They begin to ask questions, not to you but to themselves. Why doesn't it bother them? Why don't they beg to return? Why does their silence feel heavier than our noise? The fear grows not because of what you do, but because of what you don't. And fear born from absence cuts deeper than fear born from confrontation. So when they call you alone, they think it's the end of your story. But alone isn't an ending, it's a position, a vantage point, a throne they can't sit on because they're too afraid to let go of the crowd that defines them. They follow each other into circles. You walk forward into silence, and that difference is the one thing they will never forgive. They tighten their circle, louder this time, pressing their judgment into the air, like smoke you can't escape. Every glance sharpens, every word digs deeper. They want you to feel small, to mistake their numbers for truth, to confuse their laughter for strength. But strength doesn't multiply in a crowd, it dilutes. And the more they try to drown you, the more obvious it becomes that their voices aren't a chorus, they're an echo chamber, terrified of silence. Isolation cuts at first. The cold stings, the absence bites, and for a moment you wonder if they're right. Maybe being alone is weakness, maybe solitude is emptiness. That's the illusion they survive on. They need you to believe it, because if solitude holds power, then their entire existence collapses. Their belonging isn't real, it's dependency, and dependency has never built anything unbreakable. So you fall deeper into the silence, past the noise, past the hollow words, past the illusion that value comes from company. And in that depth, something sharp begins to emerge. It's not comfort, it's not forgiveness. It's clarity. Clarity that their world only survives because people like you once fed it. Clarity that when you stop feeding it, the whole structure trembles. The cracks don't start in your skin. They start in theirs. You begin to see them clearly, fragile behind their noise, desperate behind their smiles. Their unity isn't proof of strength, it's camouflage for fear. They need each other to hide from themselves, and that is why they mock you, because you've stepped into a place they'll never dare to go. Solitude, the mirror that doesn't lie, the silence that doesn't flinch, and the longer you stay there, the stronger it becomes. What felt like exile transforms into foundation. What felt like loss becomes armor. Alone is no longer absence. Alone is the space where storms gather, sharpen, and prepare. They think you've collapsed, but collapse is only the stage where monsters are built. At first, they laughed without hesitation. To them, your silence was proof that their world had won. But then something shifted. It was subtle, almost invisible, but fear always notices before the mind admits it. They caught themselves pausing when you stared too long, stumbling when you didn't answer, hesitating when you smiled without reason. Silence no longer looked like defeat. It looked like presence, and presence makes the strongest voices stumble. Their laughter started to thin. The cracks were small, but they grew quickly, like glass spidering under pressure. A chuckle that ended too soon, a whisper that sounded more like a confession. Even the boldest among them, the ones who swore you were nothing, began to flinch when your eyes met theirs. They didn't want to admit it, but they were no longer mocking you. They were watching you, waiting, nervous. The illusion they depended on, safety in numbers, was slipping. Because fear doesn't ask how many stand beside you. Fear only asks, what happens if they don't break? And you weren't breaking. Every step you stood alone was another reminder that solitude hadn't crushed you, it had sharpened you. The word alone no longer looked like weakness. It looked like something they couldn't control. And what they can't control, they fear. They started to speak softer around you, trying to cover their unease with kindness that felt brittle, like paper masks dissolving in the rain. It's better to have people than be alone, they said, but their voices shook. Advice had turned into a plea, because deep down they knew. If being alone could breed strength, then everything they clung to, their noise, their validation, their fragile unity, was hollow. And if it was hollow, then they were already falling. So the eyes that once looked at you with mockery now carried something else. Hesitation, confusion, the first flickers of fear. They thought solitude would erase you, but solitude had erased them instead. Their words no longer mattered. Their noise no longer mattered. The balance had shifted, and they could feel it. The storm wasn't out there anymore. The storm was standing right in front of them. They thought the silence was temporary. They thought sooner or later you would crawl back, begging for their noise, their approval, their fragile acceptance. But the moment you embraced solitude, everything changed. The cracks they forced into you didn't break you, they rebuilt you. Every dismissal hardened your resolve. Every laugh sharpened your edges. Every rejection stripped away the illusion that you ever needed them. Alone didn't weaken you. Alone remade you. This was the birth they never expected. Not loud, not chaotic, not filled with rage, number. The birth came in stillness, in control, in the simple act of refusing to bend, and that refusal became the sharpest smile they had ever seen. It wasn't rebellion, it was revelation. You no longer walked their path, no longer played their game. The script they wrote for you burned quietly in the silence, and all that remained was your voice, unspoken but undeniable. They looked at you and saw something they couldn't categorize. You weren't broken, but you weren't the same. You weren't seeking revenge, but you weren't forgiving. You were a presence they could neither define nor dismiss, and that terrified them, because once someone stops needing the crowd loses all its power. And they knew in that moment they had lost you forever. So you stood there, smiling faintly, silence wrapped around you like armor. Their whispers collapsed into nothing. Their eyes darted, searching for answers, but answers no longer belonged to them. They had given you solitude as punishment. You turned it into domination. They had tried to erase you with distance. You turned distance into power. And now every breath they take in your presence feels like trespassing. Subscribe, not for me, not for them, for the silence of standing alone. Because the moment you stop needing the crowd, you finally own yourself. They thought silence would fade if they ignored it. But silence doesn't fade, it expands, and now it fills the spaces between their words, stretches across their laughter, crawls under their skin. Every time you stand among them without saying a word, the air thickens, heavier than their bravado can carry. They try to continue as if nothing has changed, but every glance betrays the truth. Everything has. The presence you carry isn't loud, but it bends the room. It forces their eyes to shift, their hands to fidget, their voices to stumble. They don't know how to fight something invisible, something untouchable, something that doesn't respond. They throw their noise like stones, but stones fall silent when they hit the void, and you are the void now. Absorbing, unshaken, rewriting the balance without lifting a finger. They begin to realize that their unity isn't strength anymore, it's dependency, and dependency rots under pressure. They lean on each other, but leaning doesn't stop the weight, it spreads it, and the more they huddle together, the clearer it becomes. They need numbers to feel safe, while you need nothing. Alone, you carry more gravity than their entire crowd combined. That's why their voices falter when yours doesn't exist. What terrifies them most isn't what you say, it's what you don't. Because silence forces them to hear themselves, to hear the cracks in their laughter, the weakness in their words, the fragility in their strength. And once heard, those cracks can't be hidden again. Your stillness has become their mirror, reflecting every insecurity they tried to bury in noise. And no one survives long under that reflection. So they shift uneasily, caught between denial and recognition, unable to admit what's clear in their eyes. You're not waiting to be welcomed back. You're not craving their approval. You've stepped beyond their reach. And from this vantage point, alone doesn't mean abandoned. It means untouchable. The weight of solitude has become your crown, and it presses on their world until it breaks. They tell themselves it's nothing, just a phase, just silence that will eventually collapse under its own weight. But deep down, they know the truth. Silence doesn't collapse. It lingers, it spreads, it sharpens, and every time your eyes cut across the room, every time your smirk lingers a second too long, they feel it crawling inside them. It's not noise that hunts them anymore. It's you standing still. The bravest among them are the first to break. They speak louder, move faster, laugh harder, like children whistling in the dark, pretending they're not afraid. But the cracks show. Their laughter ends too soon. Their words stumble into silence that doesn't forgive. Their movements look rehearsed, desperate, fragile. They are no longer mocking you. They are trying to convince themselves they still matter. And the more they try, the clearer it becomes that they don't. Silence has turned into shadow, and shadows don't just follow, they consume. You've become the presence they can't escape, the weight they can't explain, the storm they can't predict. Every whisper they trade is really a confession. What if we were wrong? What if alone isn't weakness? What if alone is stronger than all of us combined? The questions haunt them more than your silence ever could, because the moment they ask them, the answers are already written, and those answers cut. They reveal that their strength was borrowed, their unity was fear in disguise. Their mockery was nothing but a mask. They realize they need the crowd because they can't stand alone, and in that realization lies the sharpest wound. Because you can. You've proven it. You've mastered it. You've turned their insult into a throne, their dismissal into domination. Now, when they close their eyes, they don't see themselves victorious. They see you, standing still, smiling faintly, saying nothing. They hear silence pressing down like a storm they can't outrun. They feel the shadow wrapping around them tighter every day, and they finally understand solitude didn't erase you, it erased them. They once believed power came from volume, from filling the air with their voices, their judgments, their shallow truths. But volume is fragile. It cracks, it fades, it dissolves the moment silence enters the room. And now as you stand alone, their noise bends beneath the gravity of your presence. They realize too late that noise was never power, it was distraction. Real power is the force that doesn't need to speak, yet controls every breath they take. Their bodies betray them. The confident stance has become rigid. The steady voice falters, cracks, dies mid-sentence. They search each other's eyes for reassurance, but find only the same fear staring back. Unity no longer strengthens them, it weakens them, exposes the dependency they swore wasn't there. They're beginning to understand that the one who can stand alone doesn't need numbers. The one who can endure silence doesn't need noise. And that truth terrifies them. You don't move faster, don't raise your voice, don't fight for dominance. You don't need to. The room already belongs to you. Their fear is building its own walls, its own chains, its own cage. Every attempt to dismiss you collapses under the echo of their doubt. Every word they throw at you shatters before it reaches your ears. They thought they'd stripped you of everything, but the moment you embraced solitude, you inherited something they never had: freedom. And freedom feels dangerous to them, because freedom means you can't be controlled, can't be silenced, can't be manipulated into needing what they withhold. Freedom means their games no longer work, their rules no longer bind, their noise no longer matters. You've broken the pattern simply by refusing to play. And in that refusal, they see themselves clearly, fragile, dependent, afraid. Now, as they stand across from you, it's not your loneliness they see. It's theirs. It's the hollowness of their noise, the emptiness of their unity, the weakness of their dependency. You've become the reminder they can't escape. Solitude isn't a wound, it's a weapon. And wielded in silence, it becomes the crown they'll never wear. The silence doesn't just surround them anymore, it lives inside them. What once felt like an insult has turned into a mirror they can't look away from. They feel the walls closing in, not from your words, but from the absence of them. Every heartbeat sounds louder in the void. Every thought becomes heavier without noise to drown it. Solitude has become a prison, not for you, but for them. And they can't escape, because the bars are built from their own fear. They whisper to one another, desperate to break the weight, but whispers only prove the silence owns them. Every word they trade is a confession. They are weaker than they admitted, smaller than they appeared, more afraid than they ever showed. And the worst part, they know you can see it. You don't need to expose them, they expose themselves, flinching under the gravity of a presence that doesn't even try. That's what terrifies them most. Your strength isn't effort, it's existence. The crowd that once roared with confidence now looks fractured, brittle. Their leaders falter, their followers stumble, and the chain that bound them together rusts with every passing second. They used to think unity made them unshakable, but unity without truth is nothing but noise, and noise doesn't stand against silence. Your solitude has rewritten the rules, stripped their illusions, and forced them into a reality they never wanted to face. Together, they are weak. Alone, you are unbroken. The air feels different around you now. Heavy, charged. They avoid your eyes, terrified of what they'll see, yet unable to resist glancing again and again. And every glance is the same, fear, confusion, surrender. You were never supposed to have power here. You were supposed to vanish when you walked away. Instead, your absence became dominance. Your silence became authority. Your solitude became a throne. This is their cage now, not yours. They built it with their own mockery, their own laughter, their own dismissal. They thought they were locking you out, but in truth, they locked themselves in. And now every step they take echoes against the bars of a prison named after the one word they gave you, alone. They called it loneliness, as if the word itself could shatter you. They thought alone was a wound, a scarlet mark of failure burned into your skin. But alone was never the wound, it was the weapon. The silence they mocked, the solitude they dismissed, became the crown they could never touch. And now, as they stand fractured and trembling, they see the truth written in every breath you take. Being alone was never your weakness. It was always your throne. Every scar they tried to laugh at has turned into steel. Every dismissal they hurled has become a brick in the foundation beneath you. They thought rejection would erase you, but rejection only freed you. Freed you from their validation, their noise, their fragile illusions of strength. And in that freedom, you rose untouchable. You don't carry their words anymore, you carry their fear. And their fear weighs more than their laughter ever did. Look at them now, the same crowd that once sneered at your silence, now avoiding your eyes, stumbling over their voices, choking on the very noise they once used as a weapon. They built their world on the belief that alone meant broken, but you shattered that lie by standing unbroken in the middle of it. Their unity wasn't power, it was dependency. Your solitude wasn't loss, it was liberation. And liberation is something they will never know. You don't need to shout victory, you don't need to scream revenge. The victory is written in their silence, their hesitation, their collapse. The throne you sit on doesn't need a crown or a kingdom. It needs only the absence of need, the unshakable truth that you are whole without them, and that wholeness has become the storm they cannot survive. So let them remember, let them choke on the word they once used to chain you. Let alone echo in their minds until it burns through every illusion they've built. They thought solitude would erase you, but solitude erased them. And now every silence they hear will carry your shadow. Every corner they retreat to will echo your presence. Because being alone was never the end. It was the beginning, and it was always your victory.